there. My name is Suze, and I work with women to help them find balance between their internal masculine and feminine energies so that they can have lives that feel really emotionally fulfilling, full of love and connection. So, I feel like I've talked about this a lot in my other videos, and I keep saying I'm going to do a video on anxious attachment. So, here we go. We're going to talk about anxious attachment. And I know there's lots of stuff out there right now about attachment styles and anxious attachment, avoidant, insecure, disorganized, all of these things, avoidant, dismissive. I mean, there's so many subcategories of all of these things. And I just want to hone in on anxious attachment today because not only have I said I wanted to do this, but I'm looking at the comments and I'm seeing a common thread in the comments of my videos, and I am so grateful to you beautiful souls who have commented on my videos and really just shared. Some of you, I can feel such an open heart space in your comments when you comment, and it makes me feel so good, and it's beautiful and connecting of us all, of us that are trying to really grow and expand and empower and become the people we know internally that we were supposed to become in this life. So thank you for those of you who've commented. And I know that a lot of you have really enjoyed my thoughts on anything on the idea of holding space. And holding space is one of the huge keys to anxious attachment style. And I don't think there's enough people talking about how the idea of holding space or space in general, how important that is. And it's ironic. It's ironic because if you know anything about feminine energy, you know that pure feminine energy is extremely spacious. Feminine energy has no fear of taking up space because it doesn't have any boundaries. Feminine energy is completely free flowing, expanding, always looking to expand even more, and just flows. So it's kind of ironic that those of us who identify with having a feminine core, for so many of us, we're so afraid of spaciousness, holding space, giving space. It creates so much anxiety for us, but yet it is one of the biggest key cornerstones that defines feminine energy is spaciousness. I'm a yoga instructor. I love yoga. I go to a yoga studio and practice many times a week. Okay? I love yoga. But I will never ever forget the very first time I ever walked into a yoga studio and tried yoga. Had no idea what I was doing. For some reason, I had this little voice inside of me telling me to try yoga. And it's funny because when I went into the yoga studio, my mindset was completely on the physical, right? Exercise. I was thinking exercise. And I was thinking how, I was working on my health. I wasn't feeling well, and I was working on my health, and I was starting to feel better, and I was starting to have a little more energy. And so my head then, kicked in and was like, well, you should be exercising, right? And then my head then kind of was in a battle with itself because I was like, well, you've tried so many different kinds of exercise, and you hate them all. Hate going to the gym, tried this class, tried that thing. I don't like any of them. So I just was like, you know what? I haven't tried yoga. I'll try yoga for exercise. And so I'll never forget that first day that I went in, sat down on my mat, and I didn't entirely know what had happened. I left that first class, and I didn't at that moment have the words or the comprehension to fully understand what happened in that first experience. But now, knowing what I know, looking back, what I was feeling was the space that it created in my body. That before that, I had been so shut down and rigid and tense and anxious in my body and just a hot mess of things in my body. And literally just one time, an hour of being on my mat, my body started to open, started to have more spaciousness in it. And I instinctively knew this feels good to me. And so even though I didn't have the words or the full comprehension of what was happening, that's what was happening. I was creating spaciousness for myself and my body, and it felt really, really good. At that time, I had two preschool age boys, which were was really heavy on me. They weren't in preschool. They were with me 24/7. They're very close in age. And at the time, I was married and my husband was working a lot of hours. So I was alone with my kids a lot. And it was really hard. I felt very isolated. I didn't have a lot of friends at that time. And it was a very heavy responsibility and was really difficult for me. So going to yoga, at that time, I was going once a week for an hour was like this liberating experience to me because I was literally creating space in my physical body and it felt good, even though I didn't, like I said, have the verbiage to understand what was happening at the time. Spaciousness feels good. Years ago when I first started my business of working with women, I did this poll and I asked women, I said, if I say the word freedom or free to you, if you feel free, if you felt total freedom in your life, what visual do you get? And a lot of times the women would give me this visual that was very similar from person to person, from woman to woman. And basically it was something along the lines of this woman in a field and the wind blowing through her hair and her arms are flung wide open and her body language is wide open. Spaciousness. You're free in a field and everything is good. Spaciousness. And yet we're so afraid of it. Why? Because we think we're going to be alone in the space, right? There's anxiety of loss. There's anxiety of rejection, isolation, betrayal, i.e. aloneness. And there's that underlying fear energy that is completely ruining everything that makes you feel good as a woman. So back to the original subject, anxious attachment. Anxious attachment. I heard someone say it this way and I thought this was brilliant. I'm going to start with this. Anxious attachment is simply the avoidance of self. Most people know, if you know anything, if you've been in the personal growth space or if you have been to therapy or anything, people know the basics, right? You know the avoidant and the anxious attachment styles and how they're opposing and how they kind of work together in a relationship and all those things. So it kind of makes it interesting if you see that when you're in the anxious attachment place, it's anxious and avoidant because you're avoiding yourself. You're focusing outside of you. And that is something that is very feminine and something that it's tricky because the whole idea of the feminine is about connection. Feminine and estrogen, women in general, everything is relational to us, right? Everything is relational. We're very aware of how we talk or if we decide this, how this is going to affect someone else. We're very aware of the relational repercussions of our actions. And that's what causes a lot of confusion for women with making decisions, right? So if we're constantly focused outside of ourselves and we're constantly focused on the relational aspects of our choices, you're avoiding yourself. You're avoiding how you feel or what you need or what might feel better to you in this moment because you're more focused outside of you and anxious about how someone else might react or respond to you. Self-avoidance. Self-avoidance. So then pulling the attention back to the self, you have to give yourself the space to settle in with what's actually going on. And that's the funny thing is so many times we don't even know what's happening when you're in that anxiety state or you're in the anxious attachment state or you're in the clinging, like a lot of people think of that, like the clingy or the needy feminine energy, wounded feminine energy, not healthy. If you're in that, clinging, grasping, desperately hoping for something or wanting something or thinking you need something from someone else, you're avoiding yourself. You're avoiding what you could potentially do for yourself. You're avoiding how you could take your power back and take care of yourself and that it has nothing to do with anyone else. This is kind of tiptoeing on the idea of boundaries and talking about boundaries. The same kind of a thing. You're anxious to do boundaries because you're afraid someone else is going to react in a negative way to you, or you're afraid you're going to lose that relationship or friendship or whatever it may be. So you don't put in boundaries into place when that's actually what you need if you were to pull the attention to yourself and what you need in any given moment. Anxiety comes with stopping to look outside of yourself, starting to look inside of yourself, and become very intimately aware of how to take care of your own needs or what is needed. I often talk about that right there is a lot of the work I do with women is helping them actually put words to their needs, because so often we go into this emotional space as women of recognizing something's not right emotionally, something is disturbing us, there's emotional chaos happening inside of us and we don't like it, so we try to run away from it by looking outside of ourselves and trying to either control or manipulate or make the outside situation be a certain way so that then we think we can feel better, when the solution is actually learning how to identify your needs, learning how to soothe yourself in your own emotional chaos, and taking back your power and responsibility for yourself and for your emotional state so that you can move yourself into an emotional state that feels better. Then you can show up better in your relationships and in your world outside of you. You show up in a better place, better state of being. And from there, you spread love out into your circle and things move and grow and progress from there. So, anxious attachment is an avoidance of the self. So, then the key would therefore then come back to the self, go inward. And if you need help identifying your needs and identifying the emotions, identifying the energies that are coming up in any particular situation, that is what I specialize in and love to do. Really stripping down these emotions deep, deep down to understand the energies at play, which then identify the needs. All these behaviors on the top are simply only symptoms of a deeper need that needs to be identified and met. But so many times these things are hard to identify if it's years of you sabotaging your needs, denying your needs, and not figuring out what the needs actually are depending on your life experience that got you to this emotional, chaotic state. So then we think we need these people to validate and reassure us externally instead of taking the responsibility for that ourselves. So then we think we have to be a certain way or act a certain way or communicate a certain way or manipulate ourselves in any particular kind of way so that that person outside of us can continue to validate and reassure us. But that's very inauthentic, obviously, if I think I have to manipulate myself and how I am to then have someone show up in a particular way for me. And it's kind of a lot of extra work. Cut out the middleman, so to speak. Why don't we just cut out the middleman and do all that stuff within ourselves instead of having to move ourselves around to be a certain way to then have someone else be a certain way so that then we feel better. You see, it's like this ping pong of dysfunction back and forth instead of just me, myself, and I taking care of all these things and then coming back to the table. There's so much more power here because then you're not manipulating anyone else. You're not controlling an external situation and you're allowing yourself to have space. You have to get comfortable with the idea of space and silence and quietness with the self. So that in itself takes some slowing down. And that right there is inner masculine energy healing in a feminine. That is inner masculine, of learning how to calm yourself down, create a centered place, a grounded place for your emotions to be seen and heard quietly with yourself, so that you can take care of what you need to calm yourself down and then to show up the way you want to show up in whatever the dynamic situation is externally. Space, slowing down. I keep talking about these core things of slowing down and spaciousness. Don't be afraid of the space. Another thing with the divine feminine that the divine feminine needs to really understand is the moment you let go of the fear of losing the man that you are in connection with, The moment you really let go of the fear of losing your connection with the man, that's the moment the king appears in the man. Because you will be speaking to the king because you are in the queen. More on that later. I'm going to leave it there. I hope this helped develop the conversation a little bit further on anxiety, holding space, and why spaciousness is everything for the feminine. If you appreciated this video and found some value, please do comment. Let me know your thoughts on this one, and do subscribe to help boost my visibility and everyone can see my message out there. I appreciate you so much. Have a beautiful day.